Well, hello. Hopefully everybody is doing well and is healthy with us today. We'd like to send a welcome to all of our friends on the West Coast. Good morning to you guys, and for us on the East Coast, it's a good afternoon. We've got beautiful sunshine here. We've got a great presentation for you today. We've got a wonderful expert that's going to be able to share a lot of good information for us as we're all dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic right now and how to deal with things, how to work with things, contamination and things along those lines. So we're really looking forward to getting this information out to you guys today. As we start, waiting for everybody to come on board, we've got just a few more people that we're expecting today. I would like to start out and give you guys a poll, and we're going to have a poll that's going to show here in just one moment. Let's see, is that coming through on the screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Outstanding. I'll give you just a few moments here. We're very excited to do this as our second webinar for you in the future. If you have not done so, you can go to our website, awci.com, under webinars. If you look at these through the tabs, you can get to it through education and careers. But we've got a number of different presentations that we're going to be doing in the future here on varying different topics, and we're excited to have you join us. It looks like we've got a lot of our folks that are going to be here on board already. So let's go ahead and let's show the poll here for everybody. So here's your results. Looks like 73% of our participants at this point had already changed their take-in procedures for both watchmaking and clockmaking. And at this point, 27% had not, and I'm sure that's made up of lots of different bits of information. So let me get started here as we go through this, our objectives for this lesson today. We have got a wonderful individual on the line with us here of Dr. Sarah Jacobs, and she is an outstanding individual for us to bring in for this presentation. She's got a wonderful bunch of slides for us to look at. And what we hope you will be able to do today is to take this information and morph that with what you're already doing in your shop or repair facility to help combat and decrease your likelihood of spreading the viruses we're working with. I've got on here updates of our material houses, and as of right now, there were no updates that we're aware of. We did post onto our website on the webinar side that you can go in and look to see what the status of each of these material houses are right now, and you can find that on our website under COVID-19 there. And we want you to recognize we're going to try to continue to do these webinars for the next couple of weeks here. So my name is Jason Champion. If you've not met me yet, I look forward to meeting you in the future, and I'm our education director, and we have on the line with us as well our executive director, Jordan Ficklin. But I would really like to introduce to you the panelists that we have set aside for us today of Dr. Sarah Jacobs. There is a lot of information to share with you concerning her, and I would like to, you can see she's got great taste in watches already. But let me give you just a little bit of a highlight of Dr. Jacobs here. She is from Arizona and graduated summa cum laude from the University of Arizona. After she graduated there, she went on to attend medical school at the Mayo Clinic. So outstanding medical education, no doubt. And she continued specialty training in ophthalmology at the Washington University in St. Louis. Unbelievable facility there. If you're not familiar with these schools. They're absolutely outstanding facilities for someone to be able to go to, no doubt. She served as the chief of the University of Eye Service and director of ocular trauma at Washington University after she completed her residency there. She then went on to the University of Washington in Seattle, where she completed a 2-year fellowship in ocular surgery. Dr. Jacobs is a highly trained specialist in managing disease of the eyelids, orbits, and different types of systems that are oriented with our eyes there. So as watchmakers and clockmakers, she's already got our attention when she's dealing with our most valuable tools here. She holds many certifications and has composed many books and chapters and publications in her field, and she currently is the assistant professor of ophthalmology at the University of Alabama at their Cohen Eye Hospital, serving as the division director of ophthalmology, plastic, and reconstructive surgery. So an absolutely wonderful surgeon, and we are so grateful for her to be able to be with us on this call today. So Dr. Jacobs, I'm not going to take any more of the time as you get started here. I will turn the time over to you to get started on our presentation here, if that's all right.
Thank you for the intro. I'm going to start by saying that I really function in the human world. I don't know very much at all about watches. That very nice watch, I literally Googled most expensive watch in the world and then picked the one that was pretty. So my focus today will instead be on kill the virus without killing the watchmaker and without killing the watch. I think that as we've looked at our society's response to the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of us have gone for a knee-jerk reaction of hide in a cave or blowtorch the world down. But the goal is to find some ways of keeping ourselves safe without harming any collateral damage to the watchmakers or the watch. Next slide. In terms of how to protect yourself, most of the spread that you'll be coming into contact with is going to be from droplets. Droplets are greater than a micron in size. They come out with coughing, sneezing, talking, especially talking loudly. And in some cases, if you're doing your cleaning with ultrasound baths, that can actually, at high temperatures, produce some bubbling or plopping or slopping. Droplets tend to fall to the floor within about a 3 to 6 foot radius. The smaller the droplets, the longer they remain suspended in the air. The longer they're suspended in the air, the more likely you are to inhale them, at which point, if they were carrying virus, you've inhaled virus. A mask, and that can even be a simple cotton mask, 2 layers, just to keep the droplets barriered from your mouth and nose, can be very helpful against droplets. And an eye shield, because there is some evidence growing in the medical community that transconjunctival spread of droplets, basically if it lands on your bare eye, you can contract the infection that way. Next. Aerosols are going to be less likely for you. These are airborne particles that are less than a micron. They tend to be produced with procedures, so suction, sonic hair brushes, or steam. They can linger in the air up to 3 hours. There are some fascinating videos online where they actually model the travel of particles suspended in the air in a room. If you're doing any activities in your cleaning that would produce aerosols, so again, high-speed sonic hair, anything that's splashing tiny, tiny droplets, or anything that's above boiling so it produces steam, that would be of more concern. For those, you actually need a professionally fitted, professionally made particulate mask like an N95, a P100, or even a PAPR respirator, and an eye shield. Next. The fundamental for protecting yourself, and everybody's already on board for this, is washing your hands. You don't need to necessarily wash your hands before you pick up the watch. You need to wash them afterward. In between any time that you've touched anything else, and you might be touching yourself, your equipment, your surfaces, wash your hands. It's hot water and soap. Use an alcohol-based gel if possible in between your water and soap washings. And the key to that is to wash long enough. The soap is really just a surfactant that's going to break down the oils and mechanically allow you to wash any of the debris off the hands. 20 seconds, which is the length of singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Avoid touching your face. A note about gloves. Gloves are exceptionally helpful because they keep anything in the environment from contacting your skin. But once you touch something with a glove, the glove is contaminated. And whatever you touch with the glove after that, if it's your workspace, your tools, your cell phone, your face, your friends, or your customers, that glove isn't magically killing virus. It's just now the surface that you can spread virus with. So what I like to do with my hands or with my gloves is pretend that I have dipped them into wet, sloppy paint or into manure, whichever you prefer, and function accordingly. If you wouldn't touch something with wet, sloppy paint or manure on your hands, don't touch it with gloves on your hands. For your clothes, consider an apron if you're doing something splashy, like ultrasound baths or any kind of brush cleaning, and change and launder when you get home. For workspaces and surfaces, detergent with a good long scrub is a good place to start. Bleach rub for 15 minutes or 70% alcohol times 15 minutes. Or if you're using the 70% isopropyl alcohol from a spray bottle, wet the surface down and then leave it until the alcohol is evaporated dry. There's been a lot of talk about going to auto shops in order to get the cleaning wipes if the store is sold out of the bleach wipes. At the auto stores, you're going to mostly find things that break down grease. So those are going to be surfactants, your C11 through C17. What you're really looking for as the active ingredient is going to be your ammonium chloride or your bleach or your isopropyl alcohol. Next slide. I'll leave not killing the watch up to you. Honestly, when Jordan sent me these images of what you guys deal with on a daily basis, I wondered if you could just euthanize the watch. Anything that I'm suggesting here that kills the virus, that would damage the timepieces that you're working on, is obviously not the right approach for you. So as I'm talking, screen out anything if you immediately think, well, that would destroy the stuff I'm working on. Maybe that's not the approach to use. But if you can find anything from the advice that I'm giving that would not damage the timepieces, that'll be the way to go. Next slide. In order to kill the virus, you need to know a little more about the virus. You've seen this picture circulating around. It seems to have become the emblem of the CDC for depicting coronavirus. Next slide. Viruses come in two major categories. There are naked viruses, basically just the DNA or RNA, and then there's enveloped viruses. What you're actually looking at here in this picture is the envelope of the coronavirus. Essentially, it's like a little space capsule, like the Soyuz that we fly our astronauts in. The envelope around it is just proteins and fats and a whole lot of little docking mechanisms that allow the virus to get from point A to point B and infect itself into a cell. When you actually open up inside the envelope, that's where the RNA is located. The RNA, kind of like the astronauts, is the business end of the virus. It's the part that allows it to replicate itself, make more viruses, and become a full-scale infection in the body. Next slide. Thinking about that capsule or envelope around it, if you can wreck the capsule, you can inactivate the virus. Just like if you can wreck the space capsule, you can inactivate the astronaut. Way number one to wreck the capsule is that on a surface, it will eventually just die on its own as that poor little envelope breaks down and degrades. How long does it survive on a surface? Next slide. So for that, our best piece of data right now is this aerosol and surface stability of SARS-CoV-2 as compared with SARS-CoV-1. Back in 2003, there was an outbreak of what we knew then as SARS. It fortunately didn't get nearly as far toward pandemic as this round of SARS has, but we did have some time to study it back at that point to figure out how long it takes to die on surfaces. Next slide. SARS-CoV-2, which is the current COVID-19 causing coronavirus, actually behaves a little differently than the 2003 SARS-CoV-1. On copper, it dies on a copper surface by about 4 hours. In air, it lingers in air and then dries up and dies in about 3 hours. On cardboard, so some of you may be receiving your intakes in cardboard shipping boxes or paper mailers, It survives up to 24 hours. So if you have a way of setting aside your incoming for about 24 before you touch or open the package, that would be wise. On plastics, up to 72 hours, so that'll be the cheaper watch faces, and on stainless steel, up to 72 hours. So 3 days on your work surfaces or on the steel components of your watch bands. There are a couple of materials missing from the current study, and so on the right side of your screen now, you'll see what SARS-CoV-1, how the 2003 virus behaved. On paper, the 2003 version of this virus would survive about 4 days, on wood 4 days, on glass 4 days. If COVID-19 behaves like the last coronavirus the world really saw, those numbers are probably pretty accurate for you too. So in essence, every surface is suspicious until about 3 or 4 days, but air and copper fare better. Next slide. If you want to be a little more proactive instead of just letting it die on its own on a surface, there's some things you can do. If you dry out the capsule for 24 hours in a desiccator, that inactivates the envelope and thus the virus. Next, you can heat the capsule. This is actually one of the most effective mechanisms that we're using within healthcare. Greater than 150 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. I read another paper yesterday suggesting greater than 158 Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. But that breaks down the capsule enough that the RNA inside cannot survive. Next. You could also dissolve the capsule. That's actually the purpose of the detergents, the bleach rugs, the alcohols, or hydrogen peroxide vapor or H2O2 gas plasma. I don't know how your shops are, but you might not have access to that. But detergent, bleach, and alcohol are all very effective at dissolving the capsule to inactivate the virus. Next. You can degrade the capsule with UV light, so that's light between 250 and 400 nanometer wavelength, for a total dose of at least 300 millijoules per square centimeter, or direct sunlight for 72 hours. A note on that though, UV light or sunlight can only kill the parts that it can see. So the things that are in nooks and crannies and shadows or the underside of the band, if the light can't reach it, the light can't kill it. But any of those methods should make the virus surrender once you've broken down the capsule. Next slide. What the medical field is doing, mainly, as I said, is heating the capsule. We have these huge walk-in autoclaves. We heat it up above 158. In fact, usually we'll take it to 210C for 30 minutes. And those conditions can be wet or dry. Those appear to be equally effective as long as the heat component is there. Next slide. As an analogy, what you might consider doing within your own intakes and workshops, you may already have an ultrasound bath that has a built-in heating element. As long as you've got your droplet precautions with a mask and an eye shield, and you stay below boiling so that you don't aerosolize the steam, and I'd suggest keeping the lid closed so that you don't produce any extra droplets. Take it up above 150 Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. That should actually neutralize the full surface of your device. Next slide. Another thing the medical field is doing, the UVC, in several of our facilities, we've actually set up a bright emitting source for UV light, and then we're using it for our N95 mask recycling, since typically those are single-use devices, as you've heard, but we are having to ration and reuse. The important thing again here is that the closer something is to the light source, the better the delivery of the UV dose that it needs. The further away, the less of a dose it's getting. So if you're using a small UV light source, your device is going to be close enough to your light source that it's almost a negligible decrease in dose per distance. But if you're using a larger source, like I've seen some people that have set up really clever big Rubbermaid bins with a UV source at the top, keep in mind that the further from your UV light that is, the less of a UV dose that it's getting. And that actually degrades at a 1/R squared. So if you're 2 inches away, you're a quarter as much of the dose as you think you're getting. And if you're 10 inches away, you're 100th the dose you thought you were getting. Next slide. Something you may already have on your benchtop or consider doing is a UV sterilizing box. This is one that I just pulled off of the internet, but looking at its 6-watt power coming from a single source, 6 watts is 6 joules per second. You need at least 0.3 joules per square centimeter. So if you look at the square centimeters of the watch band or device that you're dealing with, you can calculate out how long of a dose you need. For an average watch band, that's about 10 to 15 minutes. For a smaller piece of jewelry, about 5 minutes. But just going on the manufacturer's disinfection recommendations, I'd go 30 minutes. And again, the nooks and crannies and shadows aren't going to get hit, so they won't get treated. Next slide. Another device you might already have available is one of these smaller drying elements that people use for curing acrylics. These are, they're tricky when you're reading how many watts they provide, because most of them will say, oh, it's a 24 watt or a 40 watt, but that's producing the cumulative effect of multiple much smaller light source elements. So this one's a 40 watt, but it's accomplishing that with 21 LED lights, which means each of those lights is really only about 2 watts per light source, which means you're only getting 1 to 2 joules per second. Again, you need 0.3 joules per square centimeter. So about 30 to 45 minutes in one of these for a watch band, about 15 minutes for jewelry, and just to round up on the very safe side, I'd go 60 minutes if this were my own device or my own life on the line. And again, nooks, crannies, and shadows are limitations. Next slide. Handing the time back to Jason.
Sarah, we've actually got a, oh, I was going to say, we have a couple people who've asked some questions here. I thought maybe you could address those before we move on to this next thing there.
Sure.
One person asks whether or not ultrasonic tanks for cleaning cases, bracelets, jewelry, if they generate aerosol droplets at all.
The ultrasonic tank itself should not be generating an aerosolized droplet unless you're taking it above boiling temperature, at which point the steam becomes an aerosol. The droplets that you would splash or produce by the microcavitation bubbles should not be enough to put an aerosol in the air. And that was actually something that I ran past our own sterilization team in our central sterile at the surgical center. And they had looked into it at a professional level, and the ultrasonic baths shouldn't be producing aerosol unless you're above steam temperature.
Okay. Another person asks the effect of ozone. Will ozone kill the virus?
I do not know.
Okay.
Ozone is a wonderfully caustic stuff, but for this particular envelope, we have no data, which means I wouldn't hang my hat on it.
Okay. And with the N95 masks that are being reused, will these UV lights damage the material in any way on those?
Super question. So that was a raging debate on the National Physician Forums last week, and they've actually done studies on it. The UV light is going to degrade the rubber straps, the actual bands that are holding it tight to your face. And as those degrade, you lose some of the fit, which means you lose the seal, which means you're breathing air around the edges of the mask. But in terms of degrading the actual melt-blown material that forms the mask or breaking down its electrostatic charge, it doesn't appear to. That said, after about 15 or 20 cycles of anything, a mask that was meant to last you once isn't really going to be what it used to be.
And if we're using a homemade mask, I mean, washing it in the washing machine is going to take care of it. Hot wash, hot
dry. Yep.
Okay. Well, one last question from somebody here, and that is, we often use actually steam cleaners as well to loosen and free the debris in between bracelets and cases. So this is a, you know, obviously it's a tank that generates steam and blows it out a pressurized nozzle. Does that take the risk of aerosolizing the virus within that?
So I can give you the how physics behaves answer, but also the what I personally trust myself on it answer. The first is personally, if I were using any steam generating device, I would want to have an N95, a P100, or a PAPR on. Now that said, it's interesting that setup you've described because you're taking clean steam from a clean source and using that to steam onto your dirty device. So what are the odds that that steam will deposit on the device and then somehow re-aerosolize virus off of it? I would say that's fairly unlikely because as the steam cools, it's going to be condensing out rather than re-aerosolizing. But because there's so little known about what will or won't go airborne, I would, anything that is steaming, I'd recommend wearing a fitted mask or respirator for that.
All right, we've got some more questions, but I think we should go ahead and move along a little bit here. And if we have time at the end, we can address some of these other questions perhaps.
Outstanding. Thank you, Jordan. As I mentioned, here's our website where a lot of these documents are going to be at the conclusion of our presentation today. Each of the PDFs, one-page documents that were put into the presentation from Dr. Jacobs, they are available as a handout on this webinar, or you can download these off of our website at this link after the presentation today. How does this all relate to us? Well, as we're taking in timepieces, as we're taking in watches, and as we're taking in clocks, you know, we have to be very cognizant of how we are communicating with and working around our customers, especially in the situations where many of us are under a stay-at-home or kind of a lockdown type of situation. If we're already doing things through the mail, probably not a big change. But as we've already pointed out, many of our procedures have changed from what we would normally do. We're all thinking a little bit more globally and how we can avoid contamination to ourselves from a timepiece as well as to those around us. And you know, we've got kind of an idea here of a surgical mask. I know if I was utilizing a steam cleaner, I like to wear a face mask or a set of safety glasses all the time, just because of the debris that comes off of a watch or something. Maybe now we're doing things a little bit different with our packages, or maybe we are or are not doing house calls, specifically if we're on the clockmaking side. And in the last week, I've reached out to a number of our members as I've spoke to them on the phone and had other discussions with them of how they are working through this process. And on the clockmaking side, you know, everybody is hopefully following their local and federal regulations. Everybody has got kind of the keeping their hands nice and clean, washing their hands with a good detergent, a good soap, as we mentioned, maybe the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star song. Making sure that we protect ourselves when dealing with customers and at the take-in. You know, maybe we're not in the same area at the same time. Maybe something is laid onto a counter or put into a container that we can then dispose of that at the end of it, tissue paper or something along those lines if it's a watch. Making sure that everything is available at hand. Limit the exposure, the time that a customer is in your shop. Make sure you've got everything available to you very quickly, so you can take care of that customer and get the piece in and get the piece out, if you will, so that there's not any additional time spent there back and forth. One really good idea that we had on the clockmaking side specifically was to instead of going over some instructions, maybe take a video of you doing those instructions so those can be posted, or you can show them to them as they're leaving. Thought that was a really great idea. And then make sure that your area that you're taking your watches in and out from, or your clocks in and out from, is an area that's very easy to be cleaned. And I think the same applies to watchmakers that we were just talking about with clockmakers. But you know, something that we do as watchmakers a lot of time is we have kind of a while you wait service. We want to make sure we limit that. Maybe seal something up, as we've talked to different people about. And these are just some procedures that I've heard from people. And what I would like to do now is talk with you through you raising your hand. If you've got a question that you would like to ask Dr. Jacobs, or something that you've got a question of, let's field that for about the next 10 minutes here or so, and see what we can help you with your process a little bit. So if you would like to, go ahead and you can click on that raise your hand area. If someone's got a question, we would be more than happy to call on you. Dr. Jacobs is still on the phone with us, so we can try to get those questions answered for you.
While we're waiting for folks to raise their hands, somebody asked about the effectiveness of an N95 mask or other masks if you have a beard. Now, I know you don't have one, Dr. Jacobs, but
that you know of.
I have quite a large one, so that interests me.
So the recommendation for fitting an N95 or a P100, any of the masks, is that you are clean shaven. And that is because if the plastic or sealing edge of the mask isn't able to completely meet your skin airtight, you actually aren't benefiting fully from the mask. At best, you're having a little air leak around the edges and you're breathing that in unfiltered. At worst, since air is going to follow the path of least resistance, it's going to be coming around through your beard, under the edge of that mask, and breathing straight in at higher velocity because it's had to sneak its way whistling through the cracks. And so if you are going to be wearing a P100 or a P95 or an N95, clean shaven is the rule. Because of that, for people who cling tenaciously to their beards, there's a couple of other options. One is a packer. Those are ridiculously expensive. If you don't already own one, I actually wouldn't invest in one. What you can do, and this is actually super cool, just recently hit within the last 2 or 3 days. You know those super dorky snuba masks where it's a completely enclosed casing with a breather out the bottom and then a tube out the back top? They have coupled with some 3D additive manufacturing and filtering makers in order to create a completely safe viral proof filter that you plop onto the top of the snuba mask, and that system is available for somewhere around $100. So rather than going out and getting yourself a $1,000 papper, maybe think about dorking it up in a snuba mask with a fitted filter and keep your beard.
That's great advice. We've got a question here from our president, looks like, Mr. Rexick. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Aaron, so you should be able to ask your question.
Thanks, Jason. Dr. Jacobs, thank you for doing this webinar.
No problem.
I just have a quick question. So I run a local group of watch collectors that meet once a month, and we spend that time handling each other's watches. And obviously we've suspended those get-togethers for the immediate future. But going forward, what would you, I mean, I know we've looked at these UV light chambers and everything. Is that what you would recommend for the future? I mean, if everybody were to come and they put their watches in this UV chamber for, you know, the recommended amount of time, would that be safe enough to put in an environment like that?
With that caveat that all the nooks and crannies in the band are going to get fully treated, if you had perhaps some mechanism for putting it in on, you know, one side up, treating it for the full duration, and then pancake flipping it so that it gets at least both sides treated, that should get you fairly close. Another option would be that all of you bring X number of gloves equal to however many watches will be passed around, and there is just a ceremonial changing of the gloves in between each passing. Or all of you bring a nice bottle of isopropyl alcohol and a pair of gloves, and then you sanitize your own gloves before the next watch pass. That way your own hands are clean before and after each device gets passed.
I think that's a great idea. I like all three options, so I appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
No problem.
I see another question here about these get-togethers usually are in restaurants and that kind of stuff. That would really be dorking it up if they tried to pull that off at a restaurant.
If you do it, please take a photo and make all of this worthwhile.
Somebody's asking about maybe using Lysol laundry sanitizer in their ultrasonic. And I just Googled that, and it looks like the active ingredient in that is alkyl dimethylbenzyl ammonium chloride.
Perfect.
So that would take care of it, huh? 15 minutes?
Yep.
That would be outstanding. Sarah, I know I sent to you earlier today an image of kind of a homemade UVC container, if you will, that somebody had built, and it was utilizing some mirrors. Can you explain to us if those mirrors would be effective?
Those mirrors are very helpful. So if you think about your UV light source is emitting from that point source, and from there it's radiating outward, and every surface that it encounters either absorbs the UV, thereby creating kind of a UV shadow behind it that's going untreated, or it reflects the UV back. So as that UV light reaches the wall of your box, your room, your device, the ceiling, the floor, If it encounters a mirrored surface, it's going to reflect back, which basically amplifies up the amount of UV treatment that you're getting from all sides. It's not going to increase your total dose. It's going to allow you to achieve the total dose that the device is intended to deliver. So mirroring is great because it basically allows the UV light to bounce and continue being effective rather than absorbing into the walls of your container and being lost forever.
Outstanding. We know we all want them on those timepieces. I've got a question here from Mark Young. Mark Young, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. So you should be able to ask Dr. Jacobs your question now.
Okay, thank you. I'm concerned, I know a little bit about this recent conversation about viral load. And I think my intention, we started changing our procedures back in January 27th or a little around that time. And I knew it wasn't going to be perfect, but we started having these wipes at take-in, and these antibacterial, antiviral wipes. And all we would do is, we were wearing gloves, but we would take those wipes and just wipe the band and the case quickly. We didn't spend a lot of time with this, but I think my idea was simply to reduce the viral load, and perhaps, I mean, again, I didn't want the perfect to get in the way of the good. You know, does that help at all just to try to reduce contact, or are we assuming it has to be perfect or it's not worth doing at all?
So that is actually a wonderful, nuanced question, and also applause for you for getting a much sooner head start than a lot of people out there. There is
I'm
a
paranoid.
fantastic paper that I read a day or two ago that's talking about the issue of viral load. Essentially, that people who are exposed to a higher inoculating dose initially are more likely to get sick and more likely to suffer severe illness from it, which means that any reduction that you can do is going to be helping your cause. That said, the goal is perfect, but reductions are worthwhile. Essentially, your body's immune system has two layers of defense. Layer one is this innate immune system that's already built into you. It doesn't discriminate between what virus, what bacteria. It just says, that's foreign. Let's surround it. Let's cover it. Let's kill it. As a virus comes into your body, that innate immune system has basically particles. They're called opsonins, but they're basically just latching onto the foreign thing, surrounding it, encasing it so that it can't reach a cell membrane, so that it can't get into the cell to infect. And so if you have, you know, enough opsonins to neutralize 10 viral particles and you get 9 viral particles, odds are you'll neutralize them and your body won't get infected. But if you get a viral challenge load of 1,000 particles and you've only got opsonins to neutralize 10 of them, odds are that those other 990 are going to slip through, get into cells and infect. So a little helps, a lot helps more, and perfect is the goal.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
No, thanks for the great question.
I wanted to add a follow-up to the question we asked about Lysol, and that is the individual asked that question, followed up and said they've thought about this but haven't tried it yet. This is a material we're not normally using on watches, so you might do a test before you start exposing your watches to these kind of chemicals, since it's not one we usually use in watchmaking. Do we know whether it will damage aluminum bezel inserts or rubber straps? We don't know that yet, so you'd want to test that before anybody were to try that in their workshop.
Absolutely. The disclaimer from before that I know nothing about watches. If anything I suggest would destroy your watch, don't pick that option.
That keeps us as watchmakers and busy, but we don't want to do it from that direction. That's for sure.
That's right. It's poor form.
That's
Poor
exactly
form.
right. Poor form. There's been a question on here about showing some images of the UV arrangement. I will post those onto our website for those of you who would like to go in and see kind of this item that has been manufactured. I don't know what the cost of it was, but it was a very ingenious way of putting together some good UVC lamps, it looks like, and some mirrors, and a way to maybe make a sterilization system for yourself. So I'll post those images to our website, and I believe there's also a kind of a list, if you will, of what went into this and what you would need to purchase for that. We do have another hand raised here from Lawrence Sylvia. So if I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, so I'll let you go ahead and ask your question there if you'd like. So you are self-muted now. If you would hit the microphone on your toolbar, you should be able to ask Dr. Jacobs the question you had. Yep, looks like you've got it there.
We do a lot of, we do a whole lot of battery changes, tons of them. I guess it's a two-part question. You're saying we shouldn't do them while we take them in, we should just take them in and let them sit? Or my other question, kind of part of the whole thing, was thinking about they have these professional dental UV sterilizing ovens that are supposed to sterilize from 360 degrees. They're not that crazy expensive, you know, probably $300-400, and the time it would take to watch safe to handle.
It would depend on the wattage output of the sterilizing oven, depending on your watts. So if you take the number of watts that they list, find out whether it's from a single bulb source or from multiple bulbs.
Right.
Calculate from there how many watts each bulb puts out. And then from there, you're looking at basically a third of a minute per watt that one bulb within the apparatus is putting out until you reach a good 300 millijoules per square centimeter. So look at the size of your device, multiply that by 0.3, and then multiply that by how many joules or watts the device puts out. But those, the dental sterilizing ovens are a good option, and most of them, based on the size and power they put out, are going to be somewhere along the order of a 30-minute UV exposure to get the job done.
Okay, so that still adds a lot of time to what normally was somewhere between 3 to 5 minute job.
Yeah.
Right.
The other option is, this unveils my,
especially when some of your customers bring like 12 or 15 watches at a time.
oh dear. This unveils my lack of knowledge about the watch batteries. I'm assuming they're stainless steel cased. You could consider wiping them down with your isopropyl alcohol and having that be your mechanism for cleaning the watch, cleaning the battery, putting it back in. Or
How about
just wear
putting
a
isopropyl
mask,
alcohol
and give it back.
Yeah, I think so. I think this kind of, the idea here is that we may have to change the way we think about working on watches. Certainly the while you wait watch battery may be something that disappears in light of the bad things that are floating around in the world here.
I'm wondering if you actually put isopropyl alcohol in a spray bottle and you're handling primarily like waterproof watches, you could just spray the whole watch down.
Lawrence, I
So,
think
Dr.
that's a
Go
great
ahead,
question to ask. I was going to point out here as well, and in, you know, the final point kind of on the watchmaker side here, before we do anything, hopefully we all recognize as a watchmaker that we don't want to submerge anything directly into an ultrasonic tank or something along those lines, especially some of the heat that can come off of these lamps and things like that. We have to be considerate of what's going on inside of the watch as well, with the idea of lubrications and other things that are inside of the watch. You know, a certain amount of heat for a certain amount of time, that's going to potentially damage anything from the dial to the lubricants and things inside. So we have to balance all of this to generate the fact that we've got a safe procedure for ourselves and a safe procedure for our customer, as well as a safe procedure for the watch. And I love, again, I was trying to think how I was going to improve on this presentation, and there was no way to do that because we're thinking about all three of those things from her presentation here. One, making sure that we take care of the virus, that we take care of the watch, and that we're taking care of ourself at the same time. And this is kind of this Venn diagram that we've been looking at here, making sure that everything is taken care of and is nice and clean and safe here. So if you do a water resistant test, obviously in between any of these steps, you want to make sure that testing equipment gets wiped down as well. So if it's a watch that is water resistant, you plan on putting this into any kind of liquids of any kind, you would probably want to perform a water resistant test before you do that. And in many of our situations, this is a dry tester. And in that dry tester, now we have pressurized and decompressed the testing area inside of it. And now we're kind of atomizing some of this potentially again. So we want to make sure that we're wiping everything down and everything is nice and sanitary before we go forward. And I think the spritzing or spraying on this with alcohol is perfectly acceptable for most of the watches we're working with. Again, if it's a vintage piece, not water resistant, again, you have to take and modify these procedures to the timepiece that you're working on. But as Jordan mentioned, I think the idea of doing something while you wait right now is something we all need to be very cognizant about, and for both our health as well as the health for the customer.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's two things there you can address, Dr. Jacobs, from those comments there. One is spraying alcohol on it? It probably has the same limitations. It depends how far it penetrates, and we need to worry about how long it's on there. And then also, you can't put 10 watches in the UVC light and expect the same results, right? It's going to take 10 times as long if there's 10 watches in there.
It should not take 10 times as long with 10 watches. The limitation would be that if the watches are stacked in so densely that the light is being shadowed from the watches that are further away from your light source, that would make it less effective. But it's not like a microwave where 1 cup of coffee takes a minute and 2 chopsticks too. It is, as the light reaches the device, that light hitting that device gives it a full dose for that device. Alcohol, as I said before, the 70% isopropyl, as long as it is saturating and remaining in place for 15 minutes or until evaporated, is effective. But as a caveat to that, 70% alcohol means 30% water. And so if that water would damage the device, of course not. Another note about UV light is that it can opacify certain plastics. We're finding that with cleaning some of our intubation boxes. And so it seems to, it holds up just fine with your polycarbs, but it does steadily opacify the cheaper plastics. Just something to think about. So
very good information.
Timepiece pun. This may just be the safest with time.
Yeah, I think there's always that fallback on there, is that left to its own devices, the virus is going to die in 3 to 4 days anyways. And so if you're unsure, if it's a really dirty one and you can get in there, put it in a bag, wait 4 days.
Absolutely, better to be safe than sorry. We've got another question here from Mr. Greg Metzler. I'm trying to do these and give everybody an opportunity to get their questions in. So we've got just a few moments here left to get a couple more questions in. So Greg, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. So you should be able to, yeah, it looks like you've got it there.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Doctor, so I'm from one of the more harder hit states over here on the East Coast. You know, I'm kind of almost laughing to myself because, you know, everyone keeps throwing around the word like, you know, isopropyl alcohol. We haven't had that on the shelves anywhere here where I'm at for the past few weeks. You know, stuff like bleach is pretty much impossible to come by. You know, good luck with toilet paper. And, you know, I'm even now looking, like, as, you know, this webinar is going on, I'm looking on Amazon right now to see, you know, if I can get, like, UV lamps and try and, like, you know, do my own setup. And, you know, they're showing, you know, shipment of, like, you know, a few weeks. And, you know, I'm not sure, like, you know, okay, is this legitimate? Is this not legitimate? Because even in my own family, I have a few people, who would be at risk of this.
Yes.
I mean, we're kind of bootstrapping solutions, at least where I'm at over here. I mean, if you don't have access to easy bleach, if you don't have access to bottles of isopropyl alcohol, what can you be using, or what can you be doing? What are some
24 hours worth of sunlight appears to be effective for it. You'd want to flip it over, and obviously you don't get 24/7 sun, but sunlight is free and available, and the people hoarding toilet paper can't hoard that. So unfortunately, everything else, it is all with the grain of salt of what's still available, what's still there, and this doesn't help you at all. We're facing it within the medical community as well, because all of the perfect solutions that would work well only work if you have access to them. And so for right now, your assets are sunlight and 72 hours.
All right. Thank you.
Standing. Thank you. We've got another question here from, I'm going to go ahead and call on Benjamin.
Actually, before you do that, just I'm going to jump in here, Jason. We've got one of our clockmakers who's posted a question here, and we haven't really addressed them so much yet. As an individual who does house calls and does grandfather clock maintenance in customers' home, and obviously they can't do that right now because they're not traveling, not visiting people's homes. But his question is, once local officials declare it safe, what precautions should they continue to take, and for how long should they be doing something different when they're visiting people's homes to do repairs in the home?
Okay. So here's what we know about viral behavior right now. It's typically between 5 and 11 days after exposure that a person develops symptoms if they're going to get symptoms. And that it typically takes another 1 to 3 days for that person to get tested and get results back, which means you're essentially functioning on this delay of anywhere between 7 to 15 days after exposure before you're fairly certain that the person doesn't have it or didn't get it. Which means that when the officials give the word that it's okay to start reopening and trickling our way back to normalcy, it doesn't mean that on Tuesday we had a viral pandemic and on Wednesday it's all gone. And that's why that's a brilliant question to whoever asked it. After the all clear, some suggestions that you would consider: if I were making a home visit, I would request, if possible, that the home that I was visiting opens up their windows in order to allow some fresh air ventilation to come through. There is some evidence that the closed circuit, kind of the heating and air conditioning that's flowing through a building, tends to perpetuate or concentrate the virus within buildings. And that's why you're seeing dense housing projects more heavily hit. And so if they're able to open their windows and let the fresh air come through for a day or two before your visit, that's likely to be helpful in decreasing viral load within that environment. I would still personally recommend wearing a mask. It doesn't need to be your PAP or N95. It could just be a surgical mask or even a cloth mask for just droplet barrier. I'd still recommend bringing a pair of gloves with you and keeping that. Don't dip them in the paint, don't dip them in the manure, wash hands between, or alcohol the gloves between. And I would keep a 3 to 6 foot distance between yourself and the family whose timepiece that you're taking care of in order to protect you from them and them from you. As we get further and further out from the high infectious load within the population, we'll get more and more certain that you weren't infected 15 days ago, you're probably okay today. But especially initially on the reopening, I would play it safe as though you're still social isolating, social distancing, or physical distancing. The other anticipatory guidance is that as we're looking at the IHME epidemiology curves, it looks like most states are going to be peaking sometime between April 7th all the way out to April 23rd, give or take. There's a fantastic website If you look up IHME, it's the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. It's a University of Washington, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation collaborative, where they've modeled out based on the curve so far, when you're likely to peak, when the infection in your state is likely to subside, so that you can start to get a sense of maybe when you'll be ready to crawl back toward normal. We're looking at most states, hopefully, having their infections on the downturn to a real low population level, probably by mid-May. That said, as soon as the physical isolation measures are relaxed, we're expecting cases to resurge, and there may be another period of 1 to 2 months later this summer or in the fall when we all have to do social distancing again in order to suppress it back down to another level. We're anticipating having to follow that suppression for a few months, relax for a few months, suppress for a few months pattern off and on, depending on how this virus behaves, all the way through until about next year, so 2021, when hopefully there will be either enough herd immunity built up or when there's been an effective vaccine developed. So expect to be in for a little bit of a long haul. During the times when the distancing measures are relaxed, really try to surge up and save up, because we'll probably have another compression in a few waves over the next year. At least that's what the epidemiologists are projecting.
And I would like to end with a short poll here to see if any of you, after today's presentation, are now looking to change the way that you were doing business, the way you were collecting and taking in any repairs at this point. So I'll leave this up here for just a couple of moments. Love to get as much participation in this as we can. And we would also very much like to thank Dr. Jacobs for joining us today. Her information has been extremely enlightening in this situation where we are hesitant or not faithful in maybe what we're getting from the news and from the internet. We really appreciate your participation with us today.
You're welcome.
And it
Thanks
looks
for
like
having me. It's been fun.
Absolutely. It's looking right now as I'm closing out the poll, 97% of the people that took the poll are looking to change their the way that they're doing business right now. So we would also like to give just a little bit of a plug. In the next coming weeks, we're going to be doing a number of different webinars and presentations. So again, go back to our website, awci.com, education, careers, and webinars, and look for those that might be of interest to you. And we thank you all for joining us today and look forward to joining us on our next one. Thank you.